Stella Tsantekidou, welcome to The Next Generation.
Wow, I'm really impressed. You did my last name very well.
Is it right-wing to be proud of your nationality?
No, although nationality is not always a very exact thing. A lot of nations were created in the last couple of centuries. And yeah, some nations are older than others, but really, if we all did 23andMe tests, we would see that we mostly come from all sorts of places. And I think that what is most important is that people really like having symbols. People really like having something that unites them. And I think that's perfectly fine. And if it's not 100% factual, that is also fine.
Do you not think it's important that it's factual? I mean, is there not something really important about this sense of a nation compared to different identity forms?
It's hard for it to be super factual. I think what you're alluding to there is this problem that we have in the UK right now. And I understand that a lot of people who are politically close to me, left wing, will say being British also includes being an immigrant and being a second and third generation immigrant in particular. And I do think that at some point somebody needs to be accepted as British. For example, I think it's ridiculous to have a debate about Rishi Sunak's Englishness or Britishness or whatever else. I don't think it particularly matters because, frankly, the man went to Eton and then he became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So that's fine, guys. You can totally claim him for yourselves. And a good example of that from my motherland, Greece, is there is this basketball player called Giannis Antetokounmpo, and he's black. And I grew up in Greece without having ever spoken to a black person until I moved abroad, basically. We just didn't have any black people around. He is obviously not of Greek origin, but then he became extremely successful. And he's now an NBA player and one of the best, one of the best NBA players. He's really, really good. Obviously, now we claim him for ourselves. He's obviously Greek now. We are obviously extremely proud. So what is the problem if that person feels like they're Greek and that person is proud to be Greek? And I know other people, I have other, classmates who were, who speak Greek, but their parents were from other countries. So there needs to be a point at which someone can say, yes, you know what, I'm also patriotic about this country. I was born here, I was raised here, and I claim it as my own.
41% of 18 to 27-year-olds said that they're proud to be British. 20 years ago, it was 80%. Do you think that's important at all?
Yeah, I do think it's important. And I think what we see here is there is definitely been a bit of an overreach when it came to nationalism. After World War II, countries were really, in the West, were horrified about what happened there. And we saw nationalism as the main problem. We saw nationalism as the reason why people became aggressive with each other. And we thought this is a bad thing and we need to make sure that we stamp it out. And the result of this was that you had things like, the Beatles, John Lennon, imagine all the people living in peace and all of these things. And we focused more on the universality of human rights and and equal rights for everyone. However, as human beings, we have the need to feel like we belong somewhere, and we are wired to really, really love the things that we are attached to, the things that are around us when we are in our most formative years. So when we are babies, when we are children, when we are teenagers. And this is why I often say, when it comes to being right-wing and when it comes to being left-wing, the reason why sometimes right-wing politics are easier to make populist arguments that have a wide appeal is because right-wing political points very often appeal to our basest human instincts. So nationalism, being afraid of the other, racism, discrimination, whatever you want to call it, and liking more the thing that you're used to, that is something that is a very basic human instinct. And you can see that in animals, right? You will see a cat, for example, being really, really scared of a dog, whereas the cat may be okay with another cat, for example. That's fine. And that's not me saying that all right-wing points are wrong. Not at all. I consider myself on quite a few issues to be a bit of a small c conservative, and I have no qualms about being patriotic because it's something that speaks to me, and I feel like I like that. It's something that I don't like going against my instinct on that. But there are other points that is like with extreme nationalism or racism, for example, where as humanity, we have realized that, you know what, we really didn't like where it took us the last time. We took that to be in absolute terms. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen again. Now, I think where countries like the UK and the US went wrong, and this is not something that is emulated across Europe, by the way, but I do think Anglophone countries went there quite fast because of the aftermath of them no longer being the imperial powers that they used to be. Is they tried, because they had to organize in countries with a lot of different nations and a lot of different cultures, they did try to take importance away from the culture and the identity of the dominant nation, because that used to seem quite crass, especially in the UK. It was quite crass if you were English and the country was presiding over all of these other countries, and you had all of these other countries looking at the Queen as their monarch. It was tasteless and it was bad imperial management, so that's why they got rid of it, and they started trying to like symbols that could be applicable to everyone who was living in the UK.
Talk to me more about this idea that right-wingers generally appeal more to human instincts. Is that not true of the left?
No, because for someone to be left-wing, so for someone to be a Marxist, you need to have read Marx and know what he was talking about, and you need to understand what he meant about systemic pressure and the structures that oppress people. And that is something that takes studying. So a working class person or a person who's on a low income is not going to intuitively understand, in the society that we live in right now, Marx's theory of why it is not in fact their fault that they struggle to feed themselves or they struggle to pay their rent. Because we live in a society where we have lionized individuality, and there are some good things about that. I'm not the kind of left-wing person who says capitalism is all evil. The individualism is terrible, because you could look at my life and you could see that I'm a hypocrite if I said that. But it does take to raise your consciousness to the level where you identify as a socialist or a Marxist or whatever else. You just need to do some reading, and that's why you often see left-wing parties have a very wooden language, which people cringe at. Whereas if you are right-wing, if you are a nationalist or a patriotist, that you can make very simple points about this and say, isn't Britain great? Don't you guys love being English? I love being English. English people are the best. I'm not English, by the way. I'm not claiming that I'm English, but it is just a lot easier. Isn't it easy to say, this person sounds different from me, looks different from me, their S is in a different way, I don't trust them. Whereas this person comes from, was raised in the same village as me, on the same street, so I trust them. That's a natural thing. It doesn't mean necessarily that it's wrong, but taken to its extremes, we see what it can do.
You say being open-minded and tolerant means being these things with everyone, including right-wingers and racists. The latter is particularly important because all people are racists. It's the human condition. Our job is to advocate for the civilizing benefits of not being racist. Talk to me more about that.
Yeah, I've gotten in trouble for that when I said it on GB News, because not for the reason you would think, because people were saying, oh, are you saying that we are racist? And I had to be like, yeah, you're definitely racist, yes. So the reason why I said that, and I wrote that there, is because I understand where a lot of right-wingers will come and say, you are being stricter with white people or with British people than you are with other ethnic minorities, other religions. And they're right. when I look at I've been in the UK for 13 years. I've lived in the UK for 13 years. And the first few years that I moved here, I did notice that people who were not from the UK and who were not Christian would be given more, would be allowed to make a lot more faux passes. For example, I remember I was in university and we had ISOC societies, so Islamic societies, and they would have all sorts of fights between themselves. And once they told a gay member, someone who said he was gay, that he cannot be a member of the society. And I was in the student union at the time, and I said, wait a minute, that is really not okay. They should not be allowed to do that. And there were a lot of people who were telling me, you know what, don't make a big deal out of this because it just makes you sound petty. And I thought, that is something about British culture that can be very beneficial in some contexts. The fact that British people are very diplomatic, very gracious. But in this context, it leads to a lot of grievances and it leads to people feeling bitter. And also, I don't think that it necessarily helps the group that it is trying to help, because I had a lot of Muslims friends who I'm still very, very good friends with. Some of my best friends from university who have really, really struggled with bigotry from other Muslims because they were gay themselves, because they were making choices that other Muslim people do not approve of. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, these people came here to live in a liberal society. Why should they not also enjoy the fruits of that liberalism? So I do think that every single culture has racism. I think that British people, in terms of racism, score some of the lowest on earth. I think that Greece is a lot more racist than the UK. A lot of Asian countries are extremely racist. And there are studies that show that. And do you think British people are racist? Okay, go to India. Ask some Indian people what they think about black people. Go to China. Ask some Chinese people what they think about black people. My goodness. Go to any Arab country and ask one type of Muslim what they think about another type of Muslim. My goodness, you will see racism there. And I think that we need to be fair and we need to accept the fact that racism is bad. We don't like it. We don't like it, what it makes to our lives. We don't think it's productive. But you have to accept that all people have it to one degree or another, and they just learn to manage it better. And if it is about, especially if it's about like older people who don't have access, who don't spend as much time as you or I on the internet, just let them be, just let them live. This is not your biggest problem. This is not politics' biggest problem.
How do we counter racism whilst upholding Western liberal values that you and I so enjoy?
We have perfectly good laws which can both uphold our liberal values, and we also have a lot of perfectly good norms about how we combat racism in the UK. There is one issue, the issue of free speech, which I do think is a problem in the UK, and it is something I'm hoping to be campaigning on, because I do think that what has happened over the last few years is that people have started using the threat of legal action as a way to make their enemies shut up. And they have used the accusation of being racist as, again, a way to make their enemies lose in one way or another. And I'm not saying that you should never accuse other people of being racist, because I obviously do that all the time. But I do think that when the goodwill of people is being abused in this way, then you have a backlash, and then you have people who are no longer willing to defend you. And what I always say about when I see right-wing people online making otherwise people who I know are politically active and politically aware, and when I see them saying things that I feel like are racist, for example, if you are constantly sharing right-wing propaganda slop of brown and black kids, looking animalistic or whatever, yeah, that's not good for you, mate. Like, this is really degrading you. And what I always say is, if you had more black and brown friends, if you had more Muslim friends, then you would stop being so attached to generalizations about Muslims, about Black people, about whatever. Because the more friends you have from other races and from other religions, the more you realize the massive variety in human talent, in human character. And if you have smart and nice and lovely Muslim and Black friends, you're not going to you will not be able to accept it when people are making generalizations about these groups.
Yeah, I think one of the best antidotes towards all of this is traveling more and seeing the world. I always say that to my friends, and I've been very lucky to travel a lot this year. And it just opens your eyes so much to how different we are, especially culturally. How much of this immigration debate that's raging on and that you get asked about with small boats on GB News or wherever every day, how much of it do you think is to do in the British psyche with culture, and how much of it is ethnicity?
You mean the culture and ethnicity of people who arrive here? I think the fact that I do think that if visually you look different, then this is a bigger disadvantage. And I do think, for example, from the kind of slop that I see on social media, a lot of it, the fact that these people look so different from people in Europe. For example, if their skin is extremely dark, if their characteristics, their ethnic characteristics are more pronounced, I do think people tend to have a more animalistic reaction to that. And perhaps they do not realize that they are doing that, but it totally happens. And again, that's where my saying racism is an instinctual thing.
What do you mean by that? Like, what do you feel?
Like, I genuinely think that, like, I see people who will post videos of very dark-skinned young people doing normal young people shit. And they will be like, and I'm like, guys, see, like, just go on Photoshop, change their skin tone to, like, lighter, and you will see you would have been totally fine. And I realized that when the Palestine protests started at the very, very beginning, because I started seeing people who otherwise could have been a bit more measured, sharing videos of young people who, to me, just look like young people who, are excited that people are on the streets and whatever. But they weren't doing anything criminal or anything that I necessarily thought looked threatening. And I do think so. Yeah, I do think that looking different still matters quite a bit. When it comes to culture, though, people are probably right to not want to have extremely different cultural values, because it is true. Yeah. You know what? Like, if someone says, "Oh, people from Afghanistan have very different cultural values from us," I'm not going to argue with that. Yeah, of course they do. They have the Taliban back there. Do you think the Taliban have same cultural values? No. So I bet you some of the people who are living there probably share Taliban's cultural values. And yeah, these are not pretty values. But then again, I also have friends who are refugees from Afghanistan themselves, and they came here as children, and they're some of the coolest people I know, and they have startups, and they are gorgeous, and they are funny, and they're very liberal, and they drink and whatever else Western habit you want that you are that you like. So
I've had this conversation a few times on the show now, and every time I cringe and my buttocks clench together because I'm scared I'm going to get cancelled for some reason. But one of the ideas I've been exploring is culture and its impact on society, and how different cultures work together, if they can. And it's funny, you'll see people, I mean, it's literally a British value to hate Britain and our culture and complain, even if it's about things like our geographic location and how shitty the weather is. That's a British value, and a very cultural trait that we have. We also have other cultural traits that we're happy to complain about, and we'll even big up another culture. We'll say we like the American dream, or we like the way that Spaniards act. But then if we flip it and we go, I don't like certain aspects of this culture from another country, and I prefer the aspects in my country, people go, "Oh, racist." And Growing up in Brighton and Hove, which is the woke capital of Europe, I bought into this. Growing up, like I wouldn't discuss this, and I kind of even have to really try and get rid of that instinct now. Whenever I hear people speaking about culture, it's a difficult task to navigate this, right? The question I want to pose to you is, has multiculturalism failed?
But for you, and I will answer that, but for you, it was also because it was considered cool when you were growing up. It was considered to be the anti-establishment position to say, no, actually, I think Britain sucks. Yes, and other countries are fine, and you should never say anything bad about them. And there were similar things in Greece when I was growing up. There were definitely, the youth culture is always against the establishment. And this is why at some point now you have a youth culture that is being a bit, racist. You have youth culture that goes against the liberal establishment. You make the establishment liberals, well, you're going to get that. Multiculturalism, whether multiculturalism has failed, no, absolutely not. We didn't have a war. That's what multiculturalism failing would mean.
Is that really the line that you draw, though?
Honestly, look throughout history. You always had people from different cultures living together. Greece and Turkey used to be Christian Greeks, Turkish Christians, Greek Muslims, and all of these types of people living together. It was completely artificial. When the exchange of population happened with the Lausanne Treaty and the Turks committing the genocide against the Pontic Greeks, which is where my grandparents from my father's side were from, the countries were mixed at that time. And they were basically, this national identity was imposed on them. But throughout history, if you look at all of the different empires, you always had Alexander the Great married a Persian woman because he didn't want his empire to fall apart. He wanted people to feel like, yes, you can become Greek yourselves and don't be afraid, and you are all equal in my kingdom, and all of these things. So yes, I would say, unless there is an actual war, this is still a lot better than it used to be. Now, there are a lot of problems that come from the fact that our countries are no longer as rich as they used to be. This is why integration is harder, because you have poor people coming into a country that's no longer as rich as it used to be. So the same kind of infrastructure is not there to support them. The same kind of jobs are not there to support them. The same kind of services are not there to support them. So integration is a lot harder. And this is why I think it is totally reasonable to say, yes, we need to be a lot stricter with immigration.
What does integration actually mean to you? What are the core values that we need to integrate?
I think that people definitely need to be speaking the language. I think this is very important.
Why?
And because you need to be able to communicate with people. And I don't think that everybody needs to be proficient. And I definitely think if, for example, someone is very old and he or she is a refugee from somewhere where we think, you know what, this person totally deserves to be here, then there will be other considerations, and that's fine. I don't think that we should be strict, but you have to be able to speak English, because that is the problem that you have with a lot of areas where, especially with women, for example, who do not work and they stay at home and their husbands tell them who to vote for and they never come out of the house. And that is a problem. And that is not how the British society is functioning. It's not, you don't want to have people who are just living in a tiny little bubble somewhere away.
Well, how do we draw these lines and make sure that we're not just keeping the values that you specifically like?
I think that the way that we organize society and the way that and the reason why liberalism, why we thought that liberalism doesn't need to be strict and liberalism doesn't need to do things like, for example, having a law where you don't allow women to wear the burqa is anti-liberal, is because even though we say we as liberals don't believe that the burqa is good, we are against it, we do not tell people what to wear. This is not our job. This is not what we want to do. The state does not interfere with what women get to wear or not. But the way that we have traditionally done it is through conferring status and opportunities for people, through saying that, great, you want to be appreciated, you want to be respected, you want people to admire you. Well, in this society, this is what we like. This is what we admire. And we think the other thing, it's actually kind of cringe. We think it's lame. We don't like it. We think it's a bit pathetic. You really should stop doing that thing that we don't like.
You say, I have no sympathy for the lack of loyalty of people who are fleeing the UK. I very recently had the opportunity to move to the US if I wanted to and make a lot more money and pay a lot less tax. I didn't want to do that because I'm loyal to the country that gave me home, that raised me and trained me. These people could afford to pay tax like the rest of us.
100%. Oh my God, the rock I will die on. Stop wasting your time about the poor people who are trying to come here, and be more obsessed and angry about the rich people leaving just because they don't want to pay tax. If I could wave a magic wand and do one thing, I would be forcing every rich person in the world to pay tax in the country where they are making their money. These people want to claim that they should not be paying tax in the UK, even though they have obviously benefited from the system because of education, because of the reputation of the UK, because of our legal system. Who do they think pays for our legal system, for the UK to be run as the country that is being run, to have the reputation that it does? It is a taxpayer. Someone has to pay for this. So this is why I'm left-wing. This is why I'm not right-wing. Because I genuinely believe entrepreneurship, amazing. Innovate. Yes, you go ahead, show your talents, get rewarded for it. But by how much? Okay, you are 10 times better than the cleaner. You are 100 times better than the cleaner. Do you really think that you should be getting 1,000 times more than a nurse? No, you don't need that much money. Nobody needs to have multiple billions of pounds in the bank.
I recently moved my tax residency to Dubai. I'm only 20.
Woo! Same.
Yeah, I'm only 20 years old and I really don't feel like I can build anything of substance by staying in this country. I want to build something that contributes to society, and I want to try and tackle issues facing Gen Z that we don't speak about, and do that in an open, honest manner. I don't feel like I can do that here, and I've moved. Is that just a cope for my selfishness?
Honestly, you are the least of my problems. Once again, call me back when you have multiple millions of pounds in the bank and all of that, and then I will tell you yes, actually, because you benefit from a society to which you're not contributing. So at some point, I would expect you to move your tax residence back to the UK. I don't know at what stage that would be. That's between you and your maker. But eventually, you should be doing that. I don't think you need to do that right now. I do not think that people trying to pay tax more efficiently is something that should be demonized, because the richest people do this the most effectively, and it is there that I'm looking at. This is why I also don't get obsessed with the welfare state, even though should we reform the welfare state? Absolutely. Am I going to spend my entire career obsessing over the welfare state? No, I'm going to obsess over the billionaires who want to all move to an island in the middle of nowhere under no jurisdiction so that they can never have to pay into the system from which they benefit. Because all of these people, the workers that work for them, the consumers that buy their products, somebody has to pay for their healthcare, somebody has to pay for their education, somebody has to pay for the infrastructure where their customers and their workers drive their cars, the trains that they take to work, to clock in and clock out of their massive multinational businesses.
I think it's important that we try and quantify this with policy or some sort of bedrock. At what point would you be shouting at me? Why aren't you shouting at me?
I would be shouting at you. Also, again, for me, it depends where you make your money, right? So if you move to the US, for example, as you said, I would want you fairly quickly. Like, yeah, I would say I would leave you for the next couple of years to maybe chill out in Cape Town, and then I would expect you to move your tax residency. Generally, I think people should be embarrassed to send an invoice with a tax haven address on it. But I totally understand the struggle of an individual who's just starting out. I have the same opinions when it comes to the immigration system and the asylum system, right? You can't want to see a stricter system overall and still have sympathy with an individual. You can totally think that, you know what, someone coming here illegally from Ethiopia and claiming they are from Eritrea to get refugee status is really not okay because it makes British people not trust the system. But can you not have sympathy for some young guy who was born and raised in Ethiopia, a country that's been savaged by war and who has no economic prospects, no life, and he just wants to help their family, for example. And he was told that, you know what, start working that way and, save a lot of money and pay these guys and they're going to get you somewhere where you will be able to find a better job. Can you blame him? Of course not. Does it mean that our politicians should not change the laws? Because if they don't, people are just going to be continuously frustrated and feel like they're not being protected. Yeah, of course they should. You can hold both in your mind.
I want us to pick up all the breadcrumbs in this trail. You seem to understand this importance to be able to start out and build something, right, of value. But at what point does that stop and it's superseded by the duty to your country to go back and pay your taxes?
I don't think that paying your taxes should be your aim, your goal in life. I don't think that that's the thing. I think you should just feel this is a social characteristic that I'm referring to, and it's what I was talking about before. You asked me how can we make sure that British values are something that everybody shares, and for me it's about making something high status and something else low status. And for me, it is quite low status at the moment that you are signed up in Dubai. It is low status, frankly, because it means that you're not successful enough yet to be able to afford that. And you said it yourself. So, you know what? Try harder, I guess. I have sympathy for you. I get it. Being an influencer is quite difficult. That's fine. But if you were doing better, surely you wouldn't have to worry about all that, right? So you're not doing as well.
Is the solution just to tell people to try harder?
No, it's
also,
not.
I'm certainly not an influencer. I hate that word.
Oh, you hear that word? Well, I have embraced it recently, even though I'm literally not an influencer.
You're a political influencer.
But yeah, I think it's funny when I call myself that. So I say it. Sorry, what was your question?
I want us to stay on the thread of millionaire migration.
Okay.
So 9,500 millionaires were lost from the UK in 2024. The biggest loss in the world was from China, which was 15,200. So slightly more, a third more than the UK, but their population's 21 times bigger than ours. What do you think it actually is about these millionaires leaving? If they are selfish, why are they leaving in such large numbers now from the UK?
So if you look at the kind of millionaires that are actually leaving, very often this would be the unproductive wealth that was not paying a lot of tax anyway. So very often it will be people who are not really working. They have all of their money in trusts, and this is why they can move. The productive millionaires, those who work for banks, the executives, they still have to be in London. They still have to be living in the UK if this is where their job is. So they are staying put. This is why I'm really relaxed and I don't worry. And also because if we make it into a race to the bottom, then eventually everybody's going to feel like they cannot raise their taxes. And our taxes are not too high for European standards, for other equivalent countries. They really aren't. And I don't think that people live in London. I don't think that people live in the UK just because of taxes. What kind of person does that? Honestly, what kind of person picks where they're going to live? Where they're going to raise their family just for taxes. If somebody wants to raise their family in Dubai and they like the culture there, which is completely artificial, and you live in a country where you can literally see wealth inequality so dystopian, then good riddance, goodbye. That's not the country I want to build in the UK. That's not what I want to see the UK becoming.
You say, ask my nationalist mum if she'd hang a Greek flag, and she would say, I have more important things to do than wash a dirty cloth and wipe a dusty pole every week. This is a terrible question. What people want to know is, are you proud of your country / do you love your country? I'm going to ask you the question that you hate the most and that goes on as a talking point on every mainstream platform. What do you think to the recent flag debacle in the country?
Yeah, I think look, I have a British flag. I have the Union Jack hanging in my bedroom. I have St. George's bunting in my living room. And that's because I've always been a bit of a caricature for how much I love the Brits since I came to the UK at a time when it was really uncool, just because I just had that kind of obsession with British culture and English culture in particular, because of the movies I had watched and the books I had read when I was in Greece. And I loved the English language, and that was what first enamored me with the country. So I'm perfectly fine with the flags. I do, however, think that at what point does it just become littering? And you cannot really claim that this is people just being patriotic. I mean, obviously, it's not you guys just being patriotic if you are going outside an asylum hotel or a mosque and you're attaching a flag there. You're trying to say something, and it's really crass, it's really tasteless, it really cheapens the symbol. And I don't think it makes you look like you're proud of your country. I think it makes you look quite desperate. I totally get the anger of people and the feeling that, you know what, for such a long time I have been made fun of for being British and for being English, and I have not been allowed. You know, there were people who were saying, oh, why have they never allowed us to have the St. George's flag? Why must the St. George's flag always represent nationalist thugs? Don't English people deserve to be proud of their nation just like every other nation in the world and every other nation in the UK, right? The Welsh, nobody ever tells the Welsh they can't have their own flag, or the Scottish or whoever. Nobody says that about them. Why are the English being singled out? And you know what? I get it. Yeah, you guys are right. I know why. The reason why this happened is because you were unlucky enough that the elite of this country was of English descent. A lot of the aristocracy was of English descent. So they literally did it for management of the different nationalities. That was the reason why the English symbols were suppressed. But I'm just not sure that what they're doing right now is achieving what they want. In the same way that I support, I want to see the ethnic cleansing in Gaza stop. I think that what is happening there is likely going to be considered genocide at some point. Do I think that Palestinian activists are always using the most effective methods to have cut through in British politics? Absolutely not. Similarly, what people are doing right now with the English flag, not working.
Yeah, I don't know where I stand on this. On one hand, I'd love to see an experiment where someone just buys up like 10,000 English flags, puts them dotted around a city, and sees the social behavior change or not. Be interesting. Like, would crime rates go down? Would they go up? I quite like seeing all these English flags everywhere, but at the same time, as a Gen Zer 20-year-old, even as someone who had a classic dad painting Spitfires in the shed and taking me to the trenches to be proud of my country, I still struggle with why I should feel proud of my country, especially now. You've quoted George Orwell before. He says, what can the England of 1940 have in common with the England of 1840? But then, what have you in common with a child of 5 whose photograph your mother keeps on the mantelpiece? Nothing, except that you happen to be the same person. What's the left-wing case for having pride in Britain?
I love George Orwell. I love George Orwell so much. One of my favorite things that he says, which you may find helpful since you're saying that you struggle to see why you should be proud of being English, is about hypocrisy. And I can't remember exactly how he says, but he says that, you know what, hypocrisy is a very annoying, and I'm paraphrasing massively here, hypocrisy is a very annoying aspect of the English character, but at that I think it's actually fine, because the more you pretending that you believe in something is good enough, because in pretending to do that, then you necessarily have to do the actions that come with pretending that you believe in that, and what you believe in private doesn't really matter. And I think that a lot of left-wing people should try to do the same with being patriotic about the UK if they don't naturally feel that way. The reason why being patriotic is good if you're left-wing is because a lot of left-wingers are communitarian. We really believe in solidarity. And this is the thing that unites all of us. How are you going to have a community if you do not allow people to have something that unifies them? And what is easier to unify you with someone, not just your family members, not just those who are related to you by blood, than your own country? And that is by necessity, a lot of this will have to be the country where you were born and raised. But in my case, for example, I feel very patriotic about the UK because.
But why should you be patriotic about the UK specifically? I mean, this is a country that's enslaved populations. We're imperialists. We've got such a dirty past. Wouldn't it just be easier to find solidarity around something like climate activism or the war in Gaza?
Have you ever been in love?
I don't think so.
Wow. Okay. So this is why you can't feel patriotism. If you haven't felt in love, then you would struggle with notions like patriotism. Because the thing is, human emotions, all of these things, they're not rational. They don't necessarily, they're not tethered on specific things that you can put in graphs and statistics and whatever else. You just love something because you love something and you cannot explain it. I cannot explain to you why I think that crass pop Greek music speaks to me so much more than Dua Lipa. I really can't. Because qualitatively, it's probably not better.
It's probably better than Dua Lipa.
I wouldn't be so sure. But let's go back to the UK, right? Why? For me, it's not like I read all the history books and I took every country side by side and I said, okay, pros and cons. Here is what each country has done that is good. Here's what each country has done that is bad. And then I'm going to do the utilitarian thing. I'm going to take an Excel sheet and I'm going to put them all in there like a polyamorous person picking the perfect partner, right? That's
or
what
an
they
autist.
Do. You said it. I didn't say that. I'm just saying. That is not how you pick why you love a specific place in a specific country. I started reading Jane Austen when I was very young because I had just learned English. I was a child. I was like 9-10 years old. And it was the only kind of English books I could find in a Greek bookstore. We hadn't had eBay yet. It came a few years later. And it was the most exciting thing of my life. But anyway, and I think that I just I started getting attached to English culture there. And then I started watching English movies in English. And then I moved to the UK for university. And my formative years were there. And there were so many things about British culture that felt like a balm. That really it felt like, oh my God, it civilized me, like a wild animal that's out in the jungle and is being tormented by the rain and by wild animals trying to catch me, and then this gentle community of British people just took me in and was like, you don't have this thing doesn't have to be this bad. You can totally do it this other way. And I was like, that's amazing. So it's not rational, but it's just something nice. You know what it is? Humans need to have stories and a bit of art and magic and things like that.
I'm pissed that you've made me answer whether I've been in love or not to make that point, and then
there are ladies who will be watching this, Elliot, and they will be having a very difficult time. You've broken their hearts.
Do you think that we get history wrong by complaining about it through a moral lens?
Yes, 100%. Not that we shouldn't have moral judgment about history, but I definitely find it. You can't, unless you're considering the complete context of a situation, it is very hard to make a judgment of a specific case. And that is why in my politics as well, especially in my political dialogue, and especially when I'm on mainstream media, where I know that the audience is going to be very wide, it's not a niche audience, I very often will play into what's the mainstream narrative. I'm not going to go and say something that's far out of the Overton window from the average person, because that would just alienate them and they would make them think I'm insane. So I stick to the context in which I'm operating. And I think it is very similar with people who lived centuries ago. If you lived, for example, under a king or a queen or whatever, but you believed that we should have democracy, it would probably not make a lot of sense if you went around saying your honest belief about that, because it could get you killed. So how could we, looking back at that now, judge these people for something that was considered to be the morally appropriate thing to do?
What would you do if you were Prime Minister for a day?
Amazing question. I would 100% force rich people to come back and pay tax here. I know I may not have exactly the power to do that, but I would try. I would double the salaries.
How would you implement that?
Yeah, the implementation is a problem. So I know I would probably need to. But rather than invading other countries, rather than sending our troops and our armies wherever else, I think we should be invading non-doms who do not want to raise taxes. I think there should be an international agreement where all the countries say, we're not going to nuke our enemies, we're going to nuke non-dom countries that do not want to raise taxes. Okay, I'm being flippant right now, but you get my point. I think it's very important. I would raise the salaries of social workers and healthcare workers and teachers and all of these places that we really want to have more high-quality people working there. I would reform the welfare system for sure. I would reform the pension system for sure. I have said before that the pension system as it is just simply not possible. It's a Ponzi scheme. It's not going to last. I would focus on energy abundance. I think that's the most important thing right now, rather than talking incessantly about immigration and refugees or whatever else. A lot of these problems would be so much easier to solve if the UK had abundant energy. A lot of the economic problems, they start from the fact that energy in the UK is so expensive. And if you look in Europe throughout the last few decades, every time energy prices go up, support for far-right parties also increase. It is insane if you look at the graphs how these two things correlate.
I saw this insane graph the other day, and it shows that birth rates are falling at a way steeper rate for progressives rather than conservatives. And I mean, this makes complete sense. If you're progressive, you're probably more prone to want to be a boss bitch with a penthouse and a poodle than a conservative with a nuclear family. What's the progressive argument for having kids?
That somebody needs to vote for me when I eventually get into politics. And if you progressive, people don't get on with it and have some more babies, then we're going to be living in a theocratic regime in the next few decades, because it will only be hyper-religious people that have all of these kids. So guess what? I mean, I would hope that even if someone is born into a hyper-religious family, they can still have liberal values because they grow up in a society where they see the positive aspects of liberal values. And I think a lot of the people who are right-wing are LARPing like they are trads at the moment. And I look forward in the next 10 years to see all of the divorces that come out of all of these 21-year-olds who got married and they put it all on live stream, their marriage and their having 5 or 6 kids on Instagram. And I hope it all works out for them, but I think that for a lot of them it's not going to work out. Especially, you have a lot of right-wing very online men who are disparaging feminism and saying, oh, feminism is a cancer, blah, 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 blah. And they pretend that what they want is just a nice plain girl who's going to stay at home and have loads of kids for them. And then I'm like, right, so if the girl that you sleep with over the weekend gets pregnant, are you going to get married to her, with her, and tell her to quit her job, and then you're going to pay for her and pay her rent, pay her for your kids' foods and all of that? No, you're not going to do that. You can't do that. You're going to be really upset if that had to happen to you, and if someone forced you into that kind of life.
I think there's a lot of LARPing, as you put it, on both sides of the political spectrum at the moment. And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's partly technology and the easy access we have to status signaling over substance. The fact that everything online is very shallow, and you want to put up a story where it looks like you're driving a nice car, or that you have these luxury beliefs that boost your status. I think it happens on both sides, and it's probably a lot of the time just a cope for what you wanted to do because it felt good rather than any ideological grounding. And you see this with left-wingers who crying about the environment incessantly, and they don't focus on any other issues because they brand other people that focus on those issues, like immigration, as racist. And you also see this with conservatives in a tweed jacket who are in their room with a British flag and just make videos to camera because actually they were just quite socially averse, didn't like socializing with loads of different people, and instead of looking within and trying to work on it, they put it all into a political ideology that sort of helps them with a cope.
That's so true. And that's something that I see both on the left and the right. People will moralize and will say that, oh, these people are all terrible, they're disgusting. It's like, no, you're just antisocial. You don't like humans generally. And yeah, I get it. It's really hard being around humans. Like they're all, we are disgusting and flawed human beings. Like it's just true. But really, really, honestly, your problem is not that it is one or the other ideology that's taken over. You just don't like human beings. It's fine.
I wonder how this whole birth rate collapse is going to unfold, especially with progressives, where it's falling at a much faster rate. I was speaking to Chris Williamson the other day, and he called it genetic behavioral seppuku, where it's sort of self-selecting yourself out of the evolutionary game. And perhaps that's a sign that these progressive ideas counter evolution, and maybe all along that the next form of natural selection wasn't going to be that the Homo sapiens were able to rule out the Neanderthals because they were able to believe in these shared myths, but that actually something about progressivism fundamentally is in conflict with evolution, and they're all going to get wiped out. The world is going to get ruled by Muslims, Christians, and Mormons.
Not necessarily, though, because kids born, as I said, kids born to, very religious people don't always just continue following that religion. I do think that there is an effect of people just becoming more liberal because it's just more pleasant very often.
What do you mean?
It's just more pleasant being liberal. It's more pleasant than feeling like you have to do something because God says so.
I feel like that's quite nice.
What, having to do something because God says so?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did that. We did, Elliot, we did that. We did that and we didn't like it. I keep on saying people, guys, we can't just keep on trying to reinvent the wheel. We did see it in our human history and then we were like, that's not great. We're not going back to that. It's like people being like, women shouldn't have the vote. Well, no, women will always have the vote. Get over it.
What about the cigars, if you're right wing? That must be nice.
You can have a cigar if you're...
And a monocle.
You can do all of these things, but most of these people, they want to look like they are, Jacob Rees-Mogg in his mansion. And it's like, no, you're living in a flat in Zone 4. You're not going to get that. You can wear the tweed jacket that you got from some vintage store in Brick Lane, but that's not going to make you into an English gentleman of the 18th century.
What zone makes you into an English gentleman?
Oh, I guess Chelsea. No, they're too.
It's just Russians and
people,
Dubai
by now. Yeah, I mean, I do know people who are more like that, but I guess the only English gentry that still exists, they're all living in their country estates outside of London. They've been decimated, but some still exist.
What do you think to the British monarchy?
I do not dare to lose my breath to dismantle them. As I said, simple's fine as far as I'm concerned. I do think there are a lot of things that the British monarchy has done terribly wrong. I definitely am partial to believing that, there's probably quite a bit of racism in there. But I'm not going to waste my time trying to dismantle it. And if people like it, I'm not gonna... Who am I to, yak people's yum? I like symbols. They're good. They're useful.
You say, we paid for Tony Blair's mistakes, but we did not learn from his virtues.
Yeah, he was great he was such a good orator. He was really, really on it. And there are a lot of things that he did which now seem like catastrophic mistakes. For example, the Iraq War. I genuinely believe that the domino effect and the way that the refugee crisis has panned out, if you could point, which I don't think that the refugee crisis, by the way, is the biggest problem we have in the UK right now, or in Europe for that matter. Energy is. But it is the thing that we talk about the most. And that's when it kind of started, because that's when it was that we started feeling like, yes, we really do need to take a lot of people from these countries. And this is how these people started to feel like, because they would do things for the British Army, right? So then the UK started having a duty towards them, quite rightly. And this is when all of these massive, massive flows started happening. And a lot of other people, and of course, so many lives that were unnecessarily that unnecessarily ended without the region actually being stabilized one bit. So millions of people have died, and we still have theocratic fascists running amok. So
one of Tony Blair's key aims was to get over 50% of the population to go to university before they were 30. We've now massively surpassed that goal. Do you think that was one of his virtues or mistakes?
Yeah, I think it was a mistake. I think that it was a mistake in terms of making university be the be all and end all, especially of status. And I think that his sentiment was very good because focusing on education is very, very good. I think that it is right that you want people to have access to education. And I'm always a bit angry when I hear people saying, why should this or that person need to go to university, blah, blah. And I was like, wait, do you want this for your kid? Are you going to send your kid to university? If you're not willing to not send your kid to university, then stop asking why other people want to send their kids to university. I don't care that the university degree is expensive and it doesn't end up with a high-paying career. If people want education, they should have access to it equally. I'm not going to make university free tomorrow. I can't. Even if I was a politician, I know it's too expensive right now. But as a right, as a value, do I think it is right that only rich kids can choose what kind of subjects they're going to study and how much they're going to progress their education? No, I think it is really, really unfair. I think that our world is going to be so much better the more people have access to education. But I do think, and I think your generation may get this right, because you guys will have seen a lot of people with no university degrees and in professions that don't require university degrees just make a lot more money and make a lot more meaningful careers. And you will realize that, you know what, you don't need to be dependent on this omnipresent other structure above you to go out there and make something of yourselves. You can totally do it without. And I think especially when it comes to, starting your own business, I think that's a great thing. I think young people starting their own business is a great thing because it forces you to think, what is a real life problem that I'm going to solve? And what are real life things that I can do? I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to find this guy who does that thing and that woman who does the other thing. I'm going to connect them and then I'm go out to some other person. Like all of that, I think that's amazing. I think young people should feel empowered to do that, and people should not look down on them for doing this. Imagine someone becoming a plumber or something like this right now and starting their own business in the UK as their own plumbing business or as an electrician or whatever. You can make millions like that. Whereas you can go and study politics in Russell Group University and then you will be on a 25k salary. That's it. So
I think this is one of the biggest unspoken class-based discriminatory aspects of university that was set by a Labour government. And that's that now, with the norm being going to university, most people go, and actually the poorest of us in society, they have to work more whilst they're at university to fund it, and they perform much worse in studies. I mean, there are countless stats around this of how much more people who don't have mummy and daddy, Penelope getting sent to university and everything paid for, they don't have that. They have to work and study, and there's that clash. It means that they don't perform well in their exams, and they're already studying something that probably won't help them that much to get a job, and they're performing badly in it, or at least worse, because of factors outside of their control, without any extra support there.
I disagree with you. I think that it is actually the rich people who should tone it down with their kids' education. I think that for people from poorer backgrounds, it is very good for them to go to university and be exposed to different social circles that they would not be otherwise exposed to. I think it's very good for their networking. And I think that for a lot of kids from poorer backgrounds, from poorer places in the UK, moving to a bigger city to go to university there, this will be the first time in their lives where they get access to a network of people from higher paying professions with greater opportunities. And it is the first time where they meet people who can help them get into different types of professions. There are a lot of rich people, on the other hand, who I'm like, why does your kid need to have 1 million degrees? They really don't need that degree. They're not going to use it anyway. They're just going to be sitting around, faffing around. They will just print t-shirts and sell them to their aunts and uncles and whatever else. Let them do their stupid thing. Stop being obsessed with the status of university and rebalance funds in our society, rebalance resources in our society, so that they go to people who genuinely need them and who will benefit from them.
I agree with what you're saying. I think these 2 points can perhaps be true at the same time. One of the aspects playing into this that Rory Sutherland speaks about, and forgive me for the long quote, but I think it's super profound. He says, thanks to lazy employers using degrees as a filtration mechanism for selecting the smartest candidates, we've reached a point where it's seen as inferior to qualify for employment without a government-funded piece of paper. But here's the killer. The university degree is merely a proxy measure, a one-way measure of that. If you have a degree in maths, you're probably pretty intelligent and capable, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're totally sane or possess the ability to work with other people. In fact, that's probably inversely correlated. If you don't have a degree, it's not safe to make the opposite assumption. It's not a reliable measure, except for in one direction. What we've done is we've created an unnecessary hurdle over which we have to jump in order to enter I haven't read this in a long time. Remunerative employment. Classic British gentleman using unnecessarily big words.
Actually, the British are very good with not doing that. They're very good, especially your English judges are very good at using crisp language. But to the point, oh gosh, I forgot what I was about to say.
I think it's the fact that this is a one-way filtering mechanism. So a degree can maybe be indicative of the fact that you are industrious and can study, but the lack of a degree doesn't guarantee that you don't have those traits.
I think that the thing with degrees, right? I used to wonder that when I was working in the charity sector, and I would be hiring for jobs that, in my opinion, I did not think they required a degree. Why would I need to put a degree in there in the job description? You don't need to have a degree in politics or in wherever else to be able to do even what I'm doing right now. Why would I need a degree for the kind of things that I'm doing right now? What you need is to know how the political system works and to be very well informed and all of that. But I think what it does for employers is it shows that you are institutionalized. You know how an organization works. You know how a big institution works.
You're a perfect sheep.
And yeah, that's what they want. And honestly, a lot of these jobs, they're not particularly productive. I'm not saying we need to scrap everything from one day to the next, but there are probably a lot of very genuine criticisms that could be made about big institutions that just want more institutionalized people.
What do you think to this gender split going on in Gen Z, where you see that young women are going ever more in the liberal direction and young men are becoming ever more conservative?
It's because women these days, the more women have become empowered and, they have their own money, they don't need men for their survival, they will no longer put up with really shit behavior. And a lot of men, I think especially because of social media, and for me, social media is and our phone addictions are the one thing that ruins the relationships between the two genders the most, because you have this surrogate for human contact. So it is easy for you to distract yourself on a daily basis and not go out and seek these human connections. And that's both for men and for women. But because women no longer need to have a guy to survive practically, that just makes it that much more difficult. And I think for men as well, you are fulfilling some of your needs from your phone and from your computer and all of that. And I guess for a lot of guys, they because our status, the way that we assess status has not changed for men and women, and men are still expected in some way to be masculinity is still seen as someone masculine, seen as someone who can. I don't like the word provider, because I don't think that all young women are looking for someone who's going to pay their rent. I don't think that, but they are looking for a certain dynamism and a certain sense of security. And that can be any kind of security, but even if it is something like emotional security, a young guy who is living in a society where he's trying really hard to do something, to make something of himself, to find a meaningful job or something like that, and is really struggling, they will not be able to inspire that in any way.
Modern feminism has directly emerged adjacent to a decline in women's reported happiness. I've got a take that's going to get me cancelled. I'd love for you to shout at me out after. I think that it's disgusting that women have been domesticated all of history and that they've been pressed into certain roles. Sometimes that's exaggerated, sometimes it's massively understated. But it's an objective fact that men worked in the world mostly and created industries. I think a byproduct of that is that the workplace, generally speaking here, has been optimized for men and the way that we may like to work, different to how women would like to work. And I think now, where women have gotten more freedom, which is amazing, and I wouldn't change it for the world, they've been placed into roles that were designed by men for men, and they're expected to be fulfilled by them. I think that's the opposite of empowerment. And I don't know where this goes from here. My hope is that with women having more freedom, and guys, by the way, in society, pretty quickly realizing, oh shit, I'm going to have to work harder because now that women aren't stuck in the kitchen, they're able to prove themselves and show themselves that actually a lot of the time they're smarter than us retards. I hope with that progression that we can start to change the nature of jobs and tailor more jobs to fit around how women may like to work on average compared to how men would like to work on average. What do you think to this?
You want to change the way that women work on average, sorry.
I think I just want to see more of a chance for different ways of working. And I think that men temperamentally are suited more towards being a robot and doing monotonous things in an office.
Yeah, but men also want to go to war, remember that? The men also want war. Men get bored when they're just robots. Especially young men. They want somewhere where they can let their aggression flow. And that's where I start questioning gender, because I'm thinking, well, I also want to go to war. I'm also aggressive. What do you mean? And I'm still a woman. But
I don't know if you're representative of the average woman.
Maybe I'm not. Okay, you're right. Maybe you're right. But to go back to your statistics, I do question them because when after divorce, it's usually women who are fine and men whose happiness plummets. I would add that women are on average a lot more neurotic than men. And being neurotic means that you just are you tend to have more negative feelings as a reaction. So that could play into that. And I think in terms of careers, I think that perhaps a man can distract themselves with their career and think that their personal lives doesn't matter. And I think that on average, again, that won't apply to all women, but I do think that for most women, their personal life is very important. I know that that's a fact for me. And a lot of people, especially Greek people, will think about me that I'm career obsessed or that that's my priority. And I don't think that about myself at all. I think that my personal life is the most important thing for me. My family is the most important thing for me. Love is incredibly important for me. I love being in love. I think it's one of the most amazing things in the world. I would ruin so many aspects of my career for love, which is so anti-feminist of me. And I think that is what happens with a lot of women because being a modern woman, it's really hard. It can become really depressing when you start to realize the actual reality of what is happening, of how difficult it is to find the thing that you value the most. And I think also the thing with having kids is also something that I'm sure has an impact on other women's mental health. I know it has on me. I find it very emotionally debilitating when I'm being bombarded by people telling me that I need to find a husband and have kids because my fertility is going to evaporate before I even know it. And I'm thinking, okay, who do I have kids with? Like my cat? Like it's really, it's very anxiety inducing, and I can imagine for a lot of other women who it has been drilled down on them that that's the most important thing. They would feel really, really desperate if they're thinking, wait a minute, but I want to find someone, but I can't find someone. Or I have a boyfriend, but my boyfriend won't propose to me. Or my boyfriend doesn't want to have kids. Or what do you do? Well, that is going to make you feel very depressed.
In America, antidepressant usage has surged by 65% in the last 15 years, especially amongst young women. Something's clearly going wrong here. how do we move forwards?
Yeah, I think social media is terrible for everyone's mental health, but especially for young girls. You are being constantly bombarded by these perfect, bodies and all of that. I am not giving my child a smartphone until they're at least like 15. I think that phones should be banned from classrooms. I do not care if it's going to take them. It's not going to take them longer to get used to using AI or whatever else. Don't worry about that. We have a very short amount of time in our development where you do not have the responsibilities that mean you need to be glued on your phone all day, and we should allow kids to make the most of it. And I honestly think that would make such a big difference. And you already see that. You see the difference between millennials who grew up without an iPhone like me, and I'm even luckier because I was in Greece where these things took even longer to get hold of. Not anymore, but at the time. And our mental health is just a lot better than those of Zoomers because they've never known a world without them.
If someone hasn't listened to the rest of this conversation and they just hear these next 60 seconds now, what would you say to Gen Z?
Put your phone down. Spend as much time as you can getting to know your parents, because they will not always be able to communicate you in that way. Ask them as many questions as you can. Treasure your friends that you have in high school, although you will likely not keep them forever. Read as much as you can. Learn how to read. It's going to be such a superpower. Knowing how to read a full 500-page book. Oh my goodness. Put that in your CV. Never mind the university degree.
Much better than porn.
Definitely better than porn. Go make your own homegrown porn. Don't watch other people porn.
Stella, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Where can people find more of your work?
Oh, they should all go on my Substack, The Human Carbohydrate. And I'm also on Instagram at Tsanteka, Tsanteka. Thank you. That was great.